Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr and also with Kevin Noon, which means it is a Tuesday night college football playoff reveal. We will be here with you reacting to all of the things that we see. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, Tom Izzo was about to no longer be part of my evening, so I am great. The game had 1 minute left, and it was like, well, we're going to be on somewhere between 7 and 45 minutes from now. So the Spartans managed to miss just enough shots that Tom Izzo was not able to delay our show for like half an hour. So that was good. That was a positive.
Good start to the night. Kevin, how's it going?
Glad the basketball game is over. There will be another one, but I won't be that concerned with it because once we are done with all this, I can catch maybe the end of some action. So, all is well.
So tonight, I don't expect any drama at the top, at least in the top two, but you have Georgia losing, Miami losing. So how far will they drop? I think one of the fascinating things to watch tonight is Georgia being now a two-loss team and having currently two teams they've lost to ranked below them also with two losses. So there's certainly a floor for Georgia, but you look at Ole Miss, who has beaten them and has the same record. You look at, and Ole Miss was 16 in last week's rankings. Georgia was 3. That's a long way to go to right that kind of a wrong. So I think we might see Georgia still ranked ahead of Ole Miss despite losing to Ole Miss, which is going to rankle some people. And where is Alabama in there? They were 11. I expect them to be ranked ahead of Georgia because Bama carries more sway than Ole Miss. Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, this is going to be one where I'm trying to predict what the committee's going to do, knowing that whatever the committee does will have absolutely no bearing on what the committee does next week and will not necessarily even have any bearing on what the committee does 4 spots down in the rankings. I will say Alabama, then Georgia, then Ole Miss, just to get just because they're going to default to the brands, even though they say they're never going to default to the brands. And as you said, that's a big jump from where Georgia was to where Ole Miss was, even though it was a pretty thorough butt kicking. I think I'm going to file that in. I'll believe it when I see it.
It shouldn't even be a jump because, as we know, it's a new sheet of paper every week. So they shouldn't even be looked at what Georgia was ranked last week. So, Tom, you are way off base.
Speaking of things I don't believe,
Kevin, who's going to be number 3 this week?
Oh, that's a good question. I wanted to comment, though, on the Ole Miss Georgia thing because you had disagreement between the two human polls that have nothing to do with how the rankings actually go. The coaches poll had Ole Miss behind Georgia, whereas the AP had it with Ole Miss ahead of Georgia. But, and the show's getting ready to start right now. As for 3, I don't know. Texas. I mean, heck if I know. I mean, I just anything after 2 doesn't mean anything to me.
Yeah, I think that's
probably
2 means
5.
Yeah, probably. Tom, wouldn't you say that's probably the answer? Texas, even though
Texas.
They
Texas
have no ranked wins.
Listen, they're fancy dog Indiana. So listen, I mean, they've played a better schedule than Indiana, but they don't have any wins substantially better than Indiana. Their best win might literally be the same best win as Indiana has, in that being Michigan. So, got a Burger King commercial just for Kevin.
Oh, Kevin, the CFP is going to have it your way.
Oh, I'm going to be banned from the CFP because I've trashed one of their biggest advertisers.
Well, having the CFP show this week my way would have involved it starting at 7:00 like normal and not at 8:30 or 8:43 because of stupid college basketball. But here we are.
You know how Chick-fil-A sponsors the Peach Bowl and how that whole week of before we were at the Georgia game and Ohio State played them, we were just fed Chick-fil-A every night. Like, what if Burger King were to sponsor the Rose Bowl and or whatever bowl game we're at? And it's just like, because we're walking into the hospitality suite where, it's time to like have a drink or something. And they're like, here, don't forget your Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich. What if, as we're about to head into the hospitality suite, they're like, hey, don't forget your double Whopper. Hey, don't forget your Impossible Whopper. Hey, don't forget your chicken fries.
The Peach Bowl sponsored by, why did I gain 6 pounds this week? That was, the Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl sponsored by BK. I don't know. What's the granddaddy of all the fast food places? I'm not sure if that's good consistent or not. Rax. Yeah.
There's still a Rax in Lancaster, Ohio.
There is, yes.
I've been there a couple times, but only to get a soda through the drive-thru when I've had to go do something down at like the municipal building. No, not parole.
All right, the show is finally back on. Nothing is happening
on for you. God, you're way ahead.
Army was 25 last week.
Mm-hmm.
Just to throw that out there.
Yeah, and that's one of the few teams. Most of last week's false alarm. Now we're back to commercials. They put the graphic up, and now more commercials.
Is this on Fox?
There's more enthusiasm here in the Sensodyne commercial than there was on the Fox broadcast. But
Odysseus has a right answer.
Coming up in a minute 9,
in and out.
Minute 8, a minute 6, a minute 4. It's going to be great, and it's right around the corner. Jordan Kapler says, "Waiting on Kevin to eat the Tudor's biscuits for the bet. It seems to me like he doesn't want my 300 Kapler bucks."
I don't remember what the bet was, and why am I the idiot that has to do all these challenges other than being the idiot of the crew? That doesn't mean I have to be the food idiot too.
I mean, you're a pretty all-encompassing idiot.
Yeah, you're well-rounded.
You keep that up, and I'm going to make sure on our post-game show you have the deep voice.
What was the Tudors? Because I do remember you had to.
I don't remember
3 or 4.
3. I think you had to eat 3, right? Like 3 full Tudor's biscuits. I believe that was it. Jordan, let us know in the comments.
And he was very confident that he could do it. He's like, "Oh, no problem. I could do that."
I mean, as long as I get to pick them, I don't want like the Brontosaurus biscuit or anything like that. Like 3 ham and cheese, I'm for it.
Is the I assume, I haven't watched the HBO show The Tudors, but I assume it's about the biscuit company. Is that? Yes.
The biscuit family. It's a high intensity. It's just this battle for the biscuit family, and it's a lot like Dallas with it's biscuits instead of oil, basically.
Do you like the Bojangles family? Do they make an appearance or something for
licensing? Was too much. Licensing way too much. Tudors you can afford. Bojangles now it's a little too pricey.
Jordan Kapler says he could eat 2. I upped it to 3. So 3. We're doing a playoff explainer again. Why?
It's just like
here's a playoff explainer. Same as last week. Moving on.
Will they do an overtime explainer too?
Oh man, I hope so. I really hope so.
And then rule 10.2.3.4 point squiggly.
No, that's totally different. That is exciting and relevant. This is nonsense.
And just as a reminder to everybody, I will then jump off and jump onto the teleconference. We'll type in what they're saying, and these two guys will talk about it at 9:15.
So an important update, the winners of each round will move on to the next round, as opposed to literally every other tournament ever in history when the losers move on.
That's new.
That's new. 25, Tulane, coming in new into the rankings. So there you go. An exciting start. 25, Tulane. They were 25 in the AP poll this week as well. 24, Army. Army was 16th in the AP poll. So that's the committee telling you, no, there's no chance Army's going to move up. I mean, unless if they beat Notre Dame, maybe. Right. 23, Missouri.
Just terrible.
Who is absolute garbage, has won.
They moved down a spot.
Consequence and gotten absolutely bludgeoned by everyone decent that they played.
Even their wins have been kind of gross.
Yeah. 22, LSU.
Oof.
Yeah, down 7 spots, which they got thumped pretty good. 21, South Carolina moves all the way up from unranked to number 21. Should be bolstering someone's resume any moment now. Army at 24 is just so annoying to me. It's just, accept the fact that they're a team that will probably give, like, they're not fantastic. They're not the most talented team in the world, but do you think anyone, you tell me who in this bracket, who in the top above them wants to face Army? The answer is no one. Number 20 is Clemson. Clemson 1 spot ahead of South Carolina, which I'm sure is going to go great with everyone in the Palmetto State.
So-
19 is Louisville.
So with South Carolina in the rankings now, Alabama and Ole Miss both have ranked wins from that.
Hey, what's our rule of thumb, Tony?
Mhm. Watch the bottom of the bracket to see what they want to do at the top.
There you go. So 18 is Washington State. Speaking of teams that I would love to see ranked higher, they moved up 3 spots. So they're not, it's not out of the realm of possibility they could sneak in. 17, Colorado up 3 spots.
I'm not a Colorado believer. I know that that's like sacrilege and everything else, but I'm not on board. I'm just not.
Here's the thing about the Big 12. By rule, someone has to win it this year, and that team is going to be a top 4 seed in the playoff, and that could very well be Colorado, whether anyone believes them or in them or not, just because someone has to win that league.
I mean, go BYU. I don't know.
16 is Kansas State.
That non-conference loss is still a little bit of an issue for Colorado if there's some hinky ties going on. I don't know how that's going to be factored in to Big Ten power in Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
Big Ten is hurt because it has 4 teams that'll probably all be in like the top 6.
Yep.
But doesn't have anything else in the bottom. I mean, it is you step right off the cliff.
Yeah, Iowa losing to UCLA last week was kind of a low-key killer because that was a team that could have snuck in at the bottom of the top 25 at some point and given people one more ranked win. Texas A&M is 15 right now. So they are also right now on the outside looking in.
Texas A&M dropped without playing a spot.
Yep. Yeah. So just to run through the teams that are left, and we're going to see these teams in some order. I'm going to run through them in the order of okay. So SMU is the 14th team. So they are the 2nd team out right now.
SMU also dropped 1 spot without playing.
It's really difficult to beat the bye week.
So this
Boise
is Ole Miss
State-
jumping in.
Boise State is 13th. So they are, so that's the same as the AP poll. So Boise State ranked 13th in the CFP top 25, but of course that means they're number 12 in the bracket because they're projected as the non-Power 5 conference champion there. Georgia next up. Georgia 1 spot ahead of Boise State. Oh boy, first team out right now. How's that?
Take that, Carson Beck.
I am surprised that they are going to be below Ole Miss.
Yeah, I am too. So there's Georgia, first team out right now. So the first 3 teams out right now are Georgia, SMU, Texas A&M, and then Kansas State would be the 4th one.
I wonder if Kirby's going to call the committee stupid and idiots like he does his players. Or a player.
That's called coaching,
son.
Just marking a couple of comments for when the rankings are here and Tony disappears and the show gets better. I mean, Tom and I get to talk.
Number 11 in the bracket, number 12. No, sorry, number 11 on the
ranking.
On the rankings as well is Ole Miss. So they are 1 spot ahead of Georgia.
So closer to what the AP had versus the coaches.
So right now the only teams we have on the bracket are number 12 Boise State and number 11 Ole Miss. I have the TV muted so you don't get a weird, annoying echo. I can't imagine how much there is to talk about with this. Like, this is exactly the next play, exactly the next team you'd expect to see 1 spot ahead of Georgia. So
we're still talking about Georgia.
30-minute window instead of 60 because this is just between the 2 basketball games.
Now here's an interesting one. Number 10, Alabama. They're 1 spot behind their AP ranking. They are number 10. So right now you're looking at Boise State, Ole Miss, and Alabama having to go on the road for the first weekend of the college football playoff.
Send them to northern Alaska, please.
So now you're going to get some semblance of or some Notre Dame, BYU, probably.
Number 9, Miami.
Wow.
The Hurricanes, they would be the number 4 seed because they're still the top-ranked ACC team. So they're ranked number 9, but they're seeded number 4. I have a bracket I will have up here shortly as soon as they finish putting it all together, just because that'll, I think, make a lot of this make more sense, because when we're talking about rankings and seedings, it's kind of confusing. We know. We'll have that up in just a minute. Number 8, Notre Dame, 1 spot ahead of Miami. So they're number 8 in the rankings, number 9 in the bracket. So Notre Dame is going to go on the road to face number 7 Tennessee, who is number 8 in the brackets.
Notre
So
Dame
again,
jumps up
right now,
2 spots.
right now, this is identical to the seedings that we talked about on the show with the AP poll. You've got number 12 Boise State, number 8 Notre Dame, number 7 Tennessee, number 11 Ole Miss, and number 10 Alabama. So we're still, the teams that are left that we're projecting to have ranked: Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, BYU, Indiana, and Texas. BYU is the next one up. They are number 6 in the rankings, number 3 on the bracket.
Who do they have coming up, BYU? Let's see.
And
They just came off of an ugly win against Utah.
Yeah.
Man, one where the Utah
fortunate
AD got fined big time.
So they've got Kansas this week, and then at Arizona State, which they'll probably lose, and then they close with Houston. So
those are all games they should be substantial favorites in. Those are all 3 teams towards the middle or bottom of the Big 12, but those are all, the Big 12 is so clustered that those are all also losable games, which is kind of crazy. So there's 5 spots left. There are 4 Big 10 teams and Texas left. So
I'm saying
Oregon,
Indiana
Ohio
4.
State, Texas, Penn State, Indiana are the 5 teams that we have not seen yet that we are certainly expecting to see, unless the committee does something wild.
I think Indiana has to be 4. And then Penn State is 5.
Indiana is 5.
See, I told you.
Nailed it.
Who's Penn State?
So
Alabama having to go to Bloomington, Indiana.
Yeah, number 7 seed Indiana hosting number 10 Alabama.
At the Rock.
Man, what a time to be alive. I would be genuinely shocked if this was not number 4 Penn State, number 3 Texas, number 2 Ohio State, number 1 Oregon at this point. Man, I got to tell you, a year when we're in November, it is November 12th. Indiana is number 5. BYU is number 6. That's pretty cool. That is really legitimately pretty cool.
I wonder if Kurt Signetti will win Big Ten Coach of the Year.
I think he already has it. I think he's already, literally already has the award. I think it's on his shelf.
Probably been given the roster bonus.
Yeah. Number 4, Penn State, unsurprising. So that puts Penn State as the number 6 seed, taking on Ole Miss in the first round.
And then it's almost certainly is Texas, barring something unforeseen.
And something crazy. Yeah. I'm not ready to put the crawl in yet, but it's built.
So Penn State getting some credit for a tough loss at home to Ohio State, basically, because I think
number 3, Texas. Yeah.
That's about all Penn State has.
Yep. So now they're really going to string out the drama. Who will be number 1? Will it be the unbeaten team, or will it be the team that lost to them? Who's to say?
By a point.
It is absolutely impossible to say.
Yeah. Big if true. Texas's first highlight was against Michigan, then Colorado State.
Yeah, it's not good.
Oklahoma, just a bunch of bunch of teams in the ensemble.
A whole bunch of not much.
Yeah,
they have not put Ohio State up yet, but as soon as they do, I'll have a graphic for you with all the.
Texas still looking for their first win over a ranked team in the CFP.
So there you go. There is your top 25 on the left-hand side, and then there is your projected bracket as it lays out right now. Well, technically they haven't announced Oregon is the number 1 team in the country. I'm guessing they're ranked somewhere, so that would leave them as number 1.
Oh, good point.
But yes, that's there we go. Oregon, guessed correctly. All right, so that's a relief. So you're looking at first round matchups: Boise State at Ohio State, Notre Dame at Tennessee, Ole Miss at Penn State, Alabama at Indiana. 4 Big Ten teams, 4 SEC teams, 1 ACC team, 1 Big 12 team, 1 Mountain West team, and independent Notre Dame. So
Is there
same conference breakdown as last week.
And there's no really an argument yet to make that 2 ACC teams or 2 Big 12 teams at this point, based on what we've seen. I don't think SMU has done enough to get in there ahead of, like, which of these teams are you going to take out? Alabama for SMU? I mean, no. The committee isn't, I'll say.
No, I don't think so. And the fact that Miami lost last week is probably very good news for the Big Ten and SEC teams that are kind of potentially on the bubble there, because whoever loses that ACC championship game, assuming it's SMU and Miami, which is certainly what it looks like it's going to be right now, or if it's Clemson, either one, whoever loses that game is not getting in. You're not getting 2 ACC teams in at this point, because you don't have a 12-0 Miami that could lose a close game to SMU and still get into the field. They lost that last week. So that and then Big 12, I mean, BYU, you'd have to have, Kansas State, Colorado. Theoretically, sure, they could move up a few more spots. Maybe you get a second Big 12 team in there if BYU goes undefeated through the regular season and then loses a close Big 12 championship game. But I think I'm pretty confident in saying ACC is a 1-bid league this year. Lock it up.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'm looking to see if can somebody else come in over Boise State in that group of 5. And also, even if Boise State loses a tough one to a quality opponent, assuming there are some, they'd have to drop a long way, and other teams would have to continue to win to stay ahead, not just jump them, but then stay ahead of them. So while I think we all expect it to be Boise State, I'll keep saying it's not written in stone yet, because none of these teams are necessarily good enough to have a letdown and get away with it. And so I think we're probably just going to get married to the Boise State, Ohio State situation until Ohio State wins out and beats Oregon. Until then, this will be probably the same thing we see every single week.
Right.
Very likely. The only thing
that Oregon loses, I mean, which it's not.
Or if Boise State jumps somebody in the rankings,
which then would put a case of where it would maybe be the ACC champion that would go in there if Boise were able to climb up and be ahead of them. But even with that, if they can't win above them, they wouldn't necessarily go to. Well, I guess they would go to the 4, because if they're the 5th team, if they're that wild card team, and they're like not. If they're 11th in the national polls, then they would go to 11 rather than 12 or something.
Kevin, are you suggesting Miami at Ohio State in December? Is this what I'm hearing?
Would Ohio State re-break Miami for 30 more years?
Oh, man. Miami play. I mean, we've seen Miami playing in like 50 degrees in the Pinstripe Bowl, and that was like the most do not want. Like, they had those like jet heater flame things on the sidelines when it was like 50 degrees. And
that's what they used to warm up the NASCAR tracks and get the rain off.
Yeah. Real quickly, to circle back on the Boise State being the number 12 seed and being sort of locked into that non-power spot, I think the only thing that really materially moves the needle for me on that is if Army beats Notre Dame, you should see Army rocket up the rankings. And then if Army wins the AAC, then they might very well be that team. Because Boise State right now, Boise State's best win is a very close loss to number 1 Oregon. If Army gets the win over Notre Dame, and I think they're probably a substantial underdog, but if they do get that win over Notre Dame, then they maybe do enter that conversation. But I do think that's an important point that Kevin brought up a minute ago, which is the top 4 ranked conference champions get the top 4 seeds. That does not mean the 4 Power 4 conference teams. That means champions. That means the 4 highest ranked conference champions. So if SMU loses another game and then they beat Miami in the ACC championship game, you could very easily have Boise State as the 4 seed and SMU as the 12 seed, 11 seed, whatever it is. And if Boise State moves up, like even if Boise State just kind of wins out and moves up a couple spots, Boise State doesn't have to be the 12 seed. They could be the 11 seed or the 10 seed as the non-power group champion. And then finally, one last thing, and then someone else can talk. Washington State, just because that's another thing that's a little bit of a weird situation. Washington State is not eligible to enter as a conference champion. The Pac-2 is not considered a conference this year for playoff purposes. So Washington State is like Notre Dame. Either they get in as an at-large or they don't get in.
And they're not going to get in. There's nothing, barring everybody losing all of the games that they have remaining, which mathematically is not going to happen. Don't expect them to get in, but maybe expect the committee to just continue to like, oh, good job. Here you are at 18. Look, you've moved up 3 spots. Aren't you special? A little muss of their hair there and say, good job, good effort.
The Holiday Bowl.
I will say, I'm looking at the rest of Miami's schedule this year for wondering if they're going to lose another game. They have Wake Forest this next week. They're off this week. They have Wake Forest, and then they're at Syracuse. So I would expect them to not lose any games, although I have been saying since the start of the season that Miami's going to get knocked out of the playoffs in that Syracuse game. So let's just see if that happens.
That would be the most Miami thing ever to get to the essentially almost to the finish line and trip up against Syracuse.
Yeah, and nobody would be surprised. How about Georgia being left out? How realistic is that? Because I think it is very realistic given the 2 teams ahead of them have beaten them. So how do you, if everything stays as it is, how do you move them up? Unless they can sneak ahead of one of those 2 teams that loses in the SEC championship game. And now that team has 3 losses, and it's like, well, these are completely different records. So now we can put Georgia in there. I think that's about the only way that I can see them getting in. But I also, none of these SEC teams are good enough that they couldn't lose another game at this point.
This Tennessee game means everything.
Yeah.
Well, and Nico is a game time decision. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's going to be I don't know if that's necessarily a play-in game, but it could be for Georgia. If they don't win that game, they're out. Their remaining schedule after that game is UMass and Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
And you got to figure if you lose again, you're dropping again. I don't really see a path outside of just complete chaos. I think it's going to be very hard for them to get in as a 3-loss team. I know there's been a lot of narrative around, but their schedule's so tough, and they've gotten, they have this great win against Clemson, okay, and they have this a great win against Texas, okay, but you're playing 5 games that are significant games, and you've lost 3 of them, and you look like crap against Florida, and you got thumped by Ole Miss. That was not. I was expecting, hey, if they lose by a field goal, they drop a spot or 2. They got thumped. That was not a competitive game.
Well, and if they do beat Tennessee, and Tennessee does not have Nico, that will be a consideration for the committee that their starting quarterback was out. However, now you get into the situation where everybody just moves up one, and Tennessee maybe moves behind Georgia, and now Georgia is back in there as the 12, or here it'd be the 8. I don't think it'd be that high, but they would be probably, I guess, the 11 at that point. And so there is still a path for them, but it's getting a little sketchy, which is pretty crazy when they've come in as favorites. And also, did they miss the playoffs last year too?
Yes, they did miss the playoffs last year, and because they got the tattered remnants of Florida State in the Orange Bowl and absolutely
bad things
crushed them. So there's just so many different things. It feels like, boy, we're getting so close to the end of the season, and there's still so many different things that, boy, how does the Ohio State Indiana game? Does Ohio State win by a lot? Does Ohio State win by a little? Does Indiana win by a little? I mean, those are all different. Those are all very different changes to the picture of this thing. And that's just the one game. Does Tennessee beat Georgia this weekend? You've got a bunch of different things that are, Notre Dame Army. Who would have expected Notre Dame Army to be a potentially really significant, almost probably playoff play-in game to a certain degree.
Yeah, and so we've got 3 more of these shows on Tuesday nights, and then the final rankings on the Sunday after the conference championship game. So, yeah, we're going to see some
race back
fluctuations
from Indianapolis, hopefully, and be in
Yeah.
position to do all of that.
Yeah, just as a reminder, Big Ten championship game is the night of December 7th. I think it's an 8 p.m. kick in Indianapolis. And then the college football playoff selection show, like the one that actually really, truly matters, that happens at noon on the Sunday after that. So generally that involves all of us when we're in Indianapolis on Saturday night, dragging our groggy selves into the Woody Hayes Athletic Center around noon to watch the playoff selection show, hurriedly book tickets to wherever whatever destination we're headed to, and then get a chance to talk to the Buckeyes about that.
Yeah, it's always fun booking tickets while we're waiting for Ryan Day to come in and talk about the upcoming opponent. And try what prices did you get? Where did you what takeoff times do you have? Where's the layover? As we're all trying to figure things out.
If we've learned anything, what time we book doesn't mean that's the time we're going.
Well,
Yeah,
that is
evidenced by the Oregon trip.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to jump off here, fellas. I got to call here, and then I'll type some stuff in as it comes in.
All right, sounds
I've
good.
only got 28 comments or questions in the queue. So
all right, well let's start going on the comments then.
All right, that one's just a joke one. Somebody having fun. Let's just get here to Chip. Don't forget, SEC losses only count as half a loss in the rankings and announcer enthusiasm.
Well, and that's something that Tony touched on a minute ago with the Georgia-Tennessee game, where if Nico Iamaleava doesn't play, then, well, you can't punish Tennessee. So, you know, that's only half a loss. But for Georgia, well, it's a full, that's a full win. You got to give them credit. That's a great win. You're number 7 team in the nation. And that is in Athens. So that you get into these situations where it's like, well, you can't punish this team for losing. They didn't have their quarterback, but this team gets full credit. And it's like when you get the win and a half situations, that's when it's a little, that's when you sort of cock an eyebrow at, okay, how, you only get to allocate one win. If you're giving one team, a third credit for, well, they didn't have one of these key players, then the other team only gets 2/3. That seems like the way it should work. It's not how it actually ever seems to work.
Matt Fawcett, maybe the SEC should just sit this one out this year. Can't win them all, right?
Well, they certainly are. They certainly are trying. I have heard that it means more, and with the way things are set up right now between the Big Ten and the SEC, I think I would be hard pressed to see a year when they don't get 7 teams in between them, and 8 teams is probably going to be the norm, and 9 teams is going to happen anytime Notre Dame doesn't get in. So it just feels like that's going to, probably not every time Notre Dame doesn't get in, but a lot of times Notre Dame doesn't get in. You look at the teams that are narrowly missing out right now. Georgia is the next one out. Then at SMU, who's probably, SMU is probably going to slide in. If they make it, it's because Miami didn't make it. And then right after that is Texas A&M. If Texas A&M beats Texas, Texas is still in the field and Texas A&M's in the field. And so then the question is just who slides out there. Doug Shepard says Minnesota would beat Missouri. I mean,
they're kind of the same team in some regards.
Yeah, I mean, Minnesota just lost to who? UCLA?
Rutgers.
That's right.
Yes, Rutgers didn't have Kyle Monungai, the talented running back.
Yeah.
And I may or may not have had a small wager on Minnesota, so they're dead to me. But, I think if Brady Cook is hurt still, Brady Cook has not necessarily been there for Missouri. I think that Minnesota absolutely could win that game. But I think in terms of just 2024 cachet and prestige, they're the same damn team. I think it just depends where the game is, and I would just take the home team.
Boy, Minnesota, you look at Minnesota and there's so much what could have been. They lost to North Carolina. I think they missed a field goal at the gun at North Carolina, and they lost by 2. They lost by 3 to Michigan at Michigan in another game they could have won. they have 4 losses right now, but boy, they're 6-4, and it's like they could be 8-2 real easily, and that's even with the loss to Rutgers. That's a team that's, that could be so much closer to relevance, and they're not even in the ballpark of the rankings right now. Jordan Kapler says if Notre Dame loses, they're fully out, right?
Well, they have the worst loss out there to Northern Illinois. So if they were to lose to Army, I mean, what if it was a 1 possession game? They lost by 3, 4, 6, 7, what have you. I mean, there's certainly Notre Dame had to make some concessions for this to go through, saying, look, we know we can never be a 1 through 4 seed because we're not part of a conference. We only want to do our own deal and everything else. But you almost feel like maybe they get a little bit of a tie goes to the runner. We've not seen it. This is only year 1 of this whole situation. I'm already putting that evil on you, Ricky Bobby, of that they're going to, that they would get benefit in a tie. I mean, obviously, a loss to Army is nothing to sneeze at. Army's pretty darn good, but that Northern Illinois loss is inexcusable.
Well, and I think you can learn a lot about what the committee thinks about Notre Dame just by the fact that they're number 8 right now. They have wins over number 15 Texas A&M and number 19 Louisville, and they're still only 8th. So I think that loss to Northern Illinois, that is a real boat anchor for them. And I think that, and Bootzilla says Notre Dame can't afford a loss no matter what the score. The NIU loss sticks out, and it absolutely does. And the rest of their games are Virginia at home, which is kind of a nothing game. They play Army at Yankee Stadium, which if you lose that, you're out. Like I do think you're probably out at that point. And then they're at USC. None of those are going to be signature wins. So if you win out, they're probably hosting a playoff game. They're probably hosting the 8-9 game or the 7-10 game, something like that. But if they lose one, I think they probably are out just because you're already kind of in the neighborhood of, other teams that are going to jump you, and there's not that much of a chance to build the resume and get the signature win over a top 5 team. They don't have that on the schedule.
Valor BK Finest 704. Colorado is legit, and that's obviously in response to my comment of saying that I am not a Colorado believer this season, and I think part of it is just the amount of gushing that, like, Travis Hunter is like the only player to ever play offense and defense, which obviously is not the case. I think Travis Hunter is a very good corner. I think he's a very average receiver. I mean, what he's doing, playing 100+ plays a game is, fantastic and all. But let's pull up Colorado's schedule. I mean,
I can read it. They beat North Dakota State, which is an FCS team, 31-26. Lost at Nebraska 28-10. Beat Colorado State 28-9. Beat Baylor 38-31 in overtime, beat UCF 48-21, lost to Kansas State at home 31-28, won at Arizona 34-7, won at home against Cincinnati 34-23, and won at Texas Tech 41-27. What they have left on the schedule is Utah at home, at Kansas, and then Oklahoma State at home. Utah, obviously very banged up, gave BYU a pretty good run last week, but has not been great otherwise. Kansas has been a disaster this year other than last week when they beat Iowa State. And Oklahoma State, do you know how many wins Oklahoma State has in Big 12 play this year, Kevin?
I have not heard anything about them this year, so I think this is a trick question. I'm going to say none.
Yeah, the answer is you've heard about all of their wins because they haven't won any games yet. So that's a team that's going to go through the regular season without a ranked win. They played one ranked team at home, Kansas State, the 16th ranked team, and they lost to them. So if you win out and you end up in the Big 12 championship game, and you win the Big 12 championship game, yeah, sure, you could get in because you get the auto bid and then you're a top 4 seed. I don't think that resume is such. You don't have any signature. You have no signature wins so far. You have no signature wins left on the schedule potentially. Utah, at Kansas, Oklahoma State. No one's paying any attention to those games. So I don't know that there's a real path for them to get in as a as an at-large, because there's other teams around them that if Kansas State wins out, Kansas State has a head-to-head win at Colorado, so that might be a better, they might be a better at-large team.
So yeah, I just looking at the Big 12 standings in front of me, BYU 6-0, Colorado 5-1, and then you have 4 teams at 4-2, and two more teams at 4-3. It's you're going to need a Venn diagram to sort all this out. Jordan Kapler, serious question: is this a good year for the Big Ten, or is college football as a whole just crazy this year?
That's a great question. I think college football on the whole is pretty crazy, and I think there's a bunch of different stuff that goes into that. One of the things is the sort of obvious thing, which is the transfer portal, and you can do what Indiana did, and you can basically port in a whole team. You've seen this before. Western Kentucky did this a few years ago with guys from, I think, Incarnate Word, where they hired a coach and then they brought in like the quarterback and the wide receiver and the running back, and you just sort of, you just literally portal in basically half of an offense, and it works pretty well. And that's what Indiana has done this year from James Madison with Kurt Cignetti and a bunch of the players. That's one thing. The other thing is, because of the new clock rules, you're seeing fewer plays. When you have fewer plays, you have more variability. So if if it's it's the reason that Army and Navy would always, when they were completely outmanned, try and run the ball and run the ball and run the ball and keep the clock moving. Think of the Army Oklahoma game, the one that the guy was streaming with his feet in the shot. That one was, Oklahoma was immensely more talented than Army. And Army was able to keep Oklahoma's offense off the field and score. And I think the game ended up 28-24 or something like that, because Oklahoma, with more plays, the talent's going to win out. But with fewer plays, you get lower scoring games, which gives closer results, which means you get more upsets. That's another piece of what's going on this year in college football. That's great for the sport. I know, we have an audience largely of Ohio State fans who would love to see the blue blood team just keep winning and rolling everyone, but that's not great for the sport. It's great for the sport to have an Indiana in this conversation right now. And it's great to have some of the other teams that you're seeing, Ole Miss beating Georgia. That's great for the sport. That's fantastic. You should see more diversity in there. Ideally, you'd have a couple ACC teams or Big 12 teams, but that is not how it's shaken out. But you do have West Coast teams. You've got a BYU in the bracket. Like, that's great. That's fantastic. Looks like we got Tony checking in.
I want to jump in really quick before we get this. I'm sure you saw the graphic of the one Army drive this year. 23 plays, 94 yards, 13 minutes and 54 seconds or something like that. So, inject that right into my veins. And I don't know how they managed to get all of the commercial breaks in with that.
Yeah, I don't want to say what that was, but Potter Stewart knows what he sees, knows it when he sees it. That drive was choice. All right, here's Tony checking in from the conference call. He says a Georgia writer asks why the Bulldogs dropped so far and asks if the committee is looking at strength of schedule, in which Georgia is number one.
You can have a great schedule, and if you don't win your games, who gives a bleep? I mean, and they have a quarterback that is a turnover pinball machine. He just, Carson Beck is not it. I've talked to a couple of Georgia writers who have commented off the record to me about just how stubborn they are with Beck and the Mike Bobo-led offense and kind of what a mess everything is. So who cares what your strength of schedule is if you're not winning your games?
Yep, agree. Got another one from Tony. The committee doesn't look at rankings from week to week, but Ward Manuel admits Texas moved up because Miami and Georgia lost. I mean, yeah, that's kind of, we all looked at where Texas, at what the top three was going to be, and all said Texas at 3 because, yeah, the teams ahead of you lost. So even if you're starting from scratch, you're going to go number 1 Ohio State, number 2 Oregon, and then go, all right, well, who's next? And the next 2 teams you had last week both lost, so they're going to move down. So then Texas is kind of the next logical team there. Boy, that Texas A&M game, that could be that's going to be a fantastic renewal of that rivalry. Speaking of things that are great for college football, I know the consolidation of the sport in 2 conferences is not ideal in a lot of ways, but man, oh man, having Texas A&M back on Thanksgiving weekend and potentially having a playoff berth or 2 playoff berths on the line in that game, man, that's going to be awesome. I can't wait for that.
Yeah, Texas before that has a game at Arkansas and then home against Kentucky. You would think both of those are quite winnable, but we've seen Arkansas rise up and bite somebody. We've seen Kentucky rise up and bite somebody. So don't start, don't get too far ahead of yourself if you're Texas looking forward to A&M, because you could trip one up on the way, and then you're kind of playing for your life.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'll get back to some of the starred questions while we wait for Tony's next update right here. Doug Shepard. So Miami is still in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Miami is right now number 9, and they're number 9 in the rankings, number 4 in the seedings, and number 4 in the bracket, because they're still right now projected as the team to win the ACC. So they would be the number 4 seed if that all plays out as it does. But Miami is also 1 loss away. Miami's margin of error is gone. So if Miami loses again, especially if they lose in the ACC championship game, you're not getting in that large bid. You've got to win. You've got to win out and win the ACC title game, and then you're in. If not, you're not getting in as a 10 and 2 or 11 and 2 non-ACC champions. Yeah.
MDJ, I still don't like how Ohio State and Oregon are in the same bracket, but the lower bracket is filled with SEC teams, so it makes it look like they have set it up for the big SEC Big Ten Natty. I mean, that's what happens when you're the next available slot is the 5, and it's just the way that it works right there. So you can't 2, 3, and 4 are all off the board for you. I mean, the only way that you could sit there and move it is if you said, well, that next spot is 6, and nobody wants that.
Right. And here's the other thing. Right now, you could look at that, and Penn State is probably favored to beat BYU. So if Penn State beats Ole Miss, then you could have Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State as 3 of your 4 semifinal teams. Texas, in this case, probably would be the 4th. But this is also we're 3 weeks. We have 3 more weeks of this where it doesn't really matter, and then the one that does count. They can absolutely slide a team a slot here or there, even if they say they're not going to. They could slide a team a slot here or there and avoid some of those rematches if they want to. I wouldn't look at this bracket right now and say, here's what the committee's trying to do. We got 4 weeks before that's something that we need to, before they're doing anything that actually really, truly matters.
Tennessee writer asks why IU and BYU, both undefeated teams, by the way, jumped the Vols. Did Nico's injury factor in? No, the injury didn't factor. They just liked the Michigan, Utah wins for those 2 teams. Yeah,
and what did Tennessee do last week? Was Tennessee off last week?
Tennessee beat Mississippi State 33-14 in Knoxville in a very nondescript game.
Yeah, and that's another one that, look, this is a problem that's going to resolve itself one way or the other. Either Tennessee is going to beat Georgia this week and it won't matter, or Tennessee is going to lose to Georgia this week and it probably won't matter, because Tennessee after this they've got the Bulldogs this week, and then they have UTEP, and then they're at Vanderbilt. So this is their last chance to get a really meaningful win. They're probably not going to be in the SEC championship game, especially if they lose this weekend. So you lose this weekend, then you really have kind of lost control of your destiny at that point. If you win this weekend, you're in. I think it's safe to say if you win this weekend, you're in. If you lose, you probably need some help.
All right, we'll go back to our starred questions right now. Jason Warner says that bracket would be an easy path to the semis for the Bucks.
And I think that's a conversation that we've had a few times. Would you rather be the number 1 or the number 5 seed? And I think there's an argument. I think a lot of people would tell you you'd rather be the 1 just because you don't have that first game and you have an extra week to sort of heal up and get healthy and be fresh going into your quarterfinal game. But yeah, Ohio State against Boise State, they're probably at least a 17 to 21 point favorite, you would think. And then against Miami, you're probably, again, at least a couple touchdown favorite. Those are 2 winnable games. If you lose one of those games, it's a substantial upset. So that they have a reasonable path to the semifinals there. Oregon, I think, has, Oregon you'd probably pick to handle the Tennessee Notre Dame winner. Penn State, I honestly, either Penn State or Ole Miss, whoever wins that first round game, I think they're beating BYU. I think those are 2 teams that are just, I've seen lots of comments about how Penn State hasn't played anyone and doesn't have any great wins. I think Penn State's talented enough to beat a BYU. Ole Miss is talented enough to beat a BYU. I think whoever wins that first round game probably goes into the semifinals there. And then, Alabama, Indiana. I think Texas is the Texas and Oregon and Ohio State, to me, are 3 teams. And then there's kind of a gap. There's always, is there one team at the top of the sport, or is there 2 teams at the top of the sport, or is 3 teams at the top of the sport before you kind of hit that gap from the great teams to the very good teams. I think 3 is where I'm drawing the line right now this year. And those are 3 teams I would feel reasonably confident having in the semifinals if you're kind of filling out your bracket like you do for the basketball tournament.
Starburst 8231. Do we know how the first round game times are decided? We know how the quarters and the semis are decided because they're the bowl tie-ins, but the first round obviously are the on-campus games. Mm-hmm. So there's not that type of tie-in. So I've not seen anything to lead me to believe that. But we know the 12-5 is going to be this. I think there has to be something where if it's a West Coast game, you're not going to want to be 9 a.m. Pacific time.
Right. But, in this case, the games are in Ohio, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, and Indiana. So I think those are all, I think Knoxville's Eastern time. I don't think
Knoxville's Eastern.
Knoxville's Eastern and Nashville's Central. Yeah. So those are all 4 East Coast time. So let's just play this out. So none of those are a concern in terms of time zone where you couldn't have one early or, whatever. So at that point, it becomes what do the TV networks want and when do they want it? And the way that the first round games are set up, there's one game on Friday night, December 20th, and then there's 3 games on Saturday, December 21st. Now, only the nightcap, the night game on the 20th and the nightcap on the 21st, those are the only ones that are televised by ESPN. The other 2 have been sub-licensed out to, I think, TNT. It's either TNT or TBS.
They're either on True or TNT or something.
It's one or the other of those. So the noon game on the 21st and the mid-afternoon game on the 21st that are going to be on TNT, I think, those are the ones that are going to be what are the less desirable matchups. So those are the ones where, I would think, looking at this one, Notre Dame, Tennessee is 2 big national brands. So I think that's going to be one of the night games. You've got a bunch of other games where you've got a big fan base, but not necessarily 2 big fan bases. You might put the Ole Miss Penn State game at night on the other one, and then it's probably Alabama. Well, can they pass up a chance to put Ohio State at noon? I don't know if they can.
Game. Yeah.
But yeah, it's going to come down to which game is more desirable for TV, and those are going to be the 2 night games, and the other 2 are going to be the noon and the mid-afternoon.
All right, this is a long question. It broke up into 3 parts on one setup, but we're going to use this one. South Carolina being ahead of LSU, despite LSU beating the Gamecocks, it really came down to the committee feeling like since that game, the 2 teams have gone in different directions. They do look at head-to-head, but it's just one point of evaluation. In this case, they also looked at the body of work. So they factored in everything, in particular where those teams are now since the game was played early in the season.
And that's also a game. Yeah, that was a game that was, number 1, played early in the season. That was on Saturday, September 14th. And it was also a 3-point win for LSU. And it was also a game that South Carolina really kind of gave away. And South Carolina, since then, they have a blowout loss to Ole Miss and then a close loss at Alabama. And then since then, big win at Oklahoma, big win over Texas A&M, big win at Vanderbilt. And you go on, you beat Texas A&M by 24 points, and the committee has they have Texas A&M at 15th, that's that's going to be one that they look at and go, you can excuse the loss to Alabama, close loss to Alabama. You can excuse the close loss to LSU, South Carolina, and it's one spot. And I don't want to spoil anything for the LSU writer who asked the question. You are not getting in this year. I'm very sorry, but you have 3 losses, including to a USC team that's like below average in the Big Ten. So no, you're not getting in. So you probably don't need to be on these calls anymore.
Exactly. Doug Shepard says the Big Ten championship game is going to be epic.
Yeah, it's going to be epic almost no matter who is in that game. Because if Ohio State wins out, then you've got the Ohio State-Oregon rematch, at least the first rematch, of a game that came down to the final seconds of a game that was never more than one, it was always a one-possession game for the full 60 minutes. Fantastic game. I think everyone walked away from that going, yep, I'd watch that game again. And good news, you could get a chance to watch that game at least once, maybe twice more. Now, if Indiana beats Ohio State in Columbus in 2 weeks, can you imagine undefeated Indiana playing the number 1 team in the nation in their home state, an hour, whatever, from their campus in Bloomington? That place is going to be an insane asylum. That would be awesome. That, again, this is an audience of Ohio State fans. I get it. That's not what you're rooting for. That would be awesome for college football. That would be incredible for football in the state of Indiana.
Why are you an Indiana fan?
Yeah, that would be an incredible story. I'm not expecting it to happen. I think we may have sort of gotten a sense for what Indiana was last Saturday. But man, if that happens, that's a huge story. If Indiana loses, and I don't even know what it would take for Penn State to get in there with their one loss to Ohio State. Ohio State would probably have to lose. Ohio State would probably have to lose to Indiana, and then Indiana would have to lose to Purdue, which is probably not happening. But if Penn State somehow got in there, the narrative around that one becomes huge in terms of, can James Franklin finally win the big one and win the Big Ten championship game for the first time since 2016, and win a big game and then roll into the playoff as a top 4 seed, and how far can they go? But yeah, that's I think the smart money would be on Ohio State, Oregon right now. And yep, sign me up. I'll watch that game twice more this year.
That would be something to play that game at a quote unquote neutral site. But we know, honestly, it would be heavily tilted to Ohio State, who can just drive the 3 hours over there, versus Oregon fans who, probably want to save their shekels for the chance of going through the playoffs or what have you. So
yeah,
but go ahead.
Well, that's something that I don't know that people have completely taken into account yet. Is you looked at playoff games before, and it was like, well, I'm going to fly to the semifinal game, and then I'll fly to the national championship if they win. Now you're looking at, you could have, even if you have a home game for your first round, so there you have to buy tickets, and those are not going to be cheap. And then you fly to your quarterfinal game, which is going to be somewhere, if Ohio State wins the Big Ten, you're flying to Pasadena. I will throw in my quick endorsement. You should go to Pasadena. The Rose Bowl is awesome. It is fantastic. You should go and see that. But then if you're the number 1 seed, then you're going to probably the Cotton Bowl. I think it'd probably be the Cotton Bowl, either the Cotton Bowl or Orange Bowl. Those are both flights. National championship, that's in Atlanta, which is drivable. We drove that for the Peach Bowl a couple of years ago. It's a drivable trip, or you can fly. But again, you're looking at hotels, you're looking at game tickets. That's not going to be cheap. I mean, it is going to be pricey to try to go to all of these games. So I think people are going to make choices, and I always wonder about the people who are going to go, well, I don't want to go to the quarterfinal. I'm going to save my money for the semifinal. Well, one of those teams is going to lose, and then you're going to miss out on your trip. So it's everyone's going to have some difficult decisions to make, I think, coming up.
I'll get to Tony's comment here in a second, but Market X talking about Crimson Tide versus Crimson and Cream in that 10-7 game. That would be something. Somebody would have to dictate that they are wearing white or cream or something, just so you can differentiate who is who.
Yep.
Go ahead.
USA Today writer asking why Georgia dropped further than Miami. Well, that was Miami's first loss, and it was close, whereas Georgia's loss was its second and not close. Yeah, honestly, not even the first and the second, because those should be basically baked in. Miami lost not to a great team, but they lost a reasonably close game. Georgia got thumped. Georgia lost a 3-score game. They got walloped,
and it wasn't even that close.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It wasn't that close. No.
Let's go through here. I know I always fear that I'm going to start a new question, and then Tony will put up something that we want to get there to. Lisa Sims, what kind of game plan do you think Bama would try against us? You saying we would have trouble against Milroe? I don't think Bama would beat us. I mean, here's the thing, Milroe is good at two things, running and the deep pass. Those are his strengths right there. So it would certainly put pressure on Ohio State secondary, but you can't necessarily load the box up just try and stop the run because of what he can do, obviously, with Ryan Williams and I don't know the personnel that well for the Crimson Tide, but I think anybody who watches college football knows that Ryan Williams is a problem there. Defensively, I don't necessarily know. I think that Bama has had some defensive breakdowns. So, I would be interested to see that.
Yeah. Jalen Milroe, to me, he presents a lot of he's not exactly the same quarterback as Dylan Gabriel, but the stuff that Dylan Gabriel did to Ohio State in that game, Jalen Milroe can present related challenges. Not exactly, but he can, as you said, throw the deep ball. He can, as you said, run the ball. And, I don't think Alabama's defense is great. I think you have definitely seen that this is year one post Nick Saban. Georgia put up 34 points on him. Vanderbilt put 40 points up on him. But they've also, they shut down LSU pretty effectively. They shut out Missouri a couple weeks ago. They gave up 24 to Tennessee, which is not, they didn't exactly get it run up on them there. But I don't think Alabama is, Ohio State goes into that game as a favorite, certainly. But I don't think that's an easy game for Ohio State. I think Alabama certainly could present a challenge.
Yeah, I agree. From Tony, why Miami over SMU when SMU's loss is to the number 6 team? Miami has a really good offense, and when they compare the body of work, they just like Miami more. At least we're not in the days where we're listening to Boo Corrigan or somebody talking about what was it, like legendary offense or whatever they would have there. But yeah, I think it's pretty safe to say that what Miami is doing in terms of its competition versus SMU, you advantage Miami.
Yeah, I'm looking through the schedule for SMU, and they beat Pitt, who's now out of the rankings. They beat Pitt by 23, which was too many points, and now Pitt is no longer a ranked win. They won at Louisville by 7, 34 to 27. So that's one ranked win. The rest of the schedule, they lost to BYU by only 3 points, but they lost to BYU. And the rest of the schedule, they won at Nevada week 1. They beat HCU. Is that Holy Cross?
I would think so. Yeah.
They play teams. That's literally. It's gonna drive me nuts. I can't remember who it is, but HCU Huskies. That's literally like FCS Southwest in the old EA Sports game. I literally cannot remember what HCU stands for. That's how impressive that is. Houston Christian.
Yeah.
It used to be Houston Baptist. That's why they changed their name.
They're more inclusive.
Yes, they're the ones that have the stadium that is. If you pull up the stadium on Google Earth, there's a CVS like right next door, like a CVS pharmacy right next door. Yeah, that's the old Houston Baptist. That's why I didn't recognize it. They beat TCU 66 to 42. They beat Florida State. The win over Louisville we talked about. At Stanford they won. At Duke they won by 1 in overtime. And then the rest of their schedule is Boston College, at Virginia, and Cal. You don't have you're gonna go into the ACC championship game, assuming you don't lose. You're going to go into that, if you make it, with 1 ranked win, and then either you beat Miami and you make it, or you don't beat Miami and you don't make it. And Miami's in a similar spot. Miami has a ranked win over Louisville by 7 on the road, 52-45. And that's it. The rest of their schedule at Florida, Florida A&M, Ball State, at USF, Virginia Tech, at Cal, at Louisville that we mentioned, home for Florida State, home for Duke, at Georgia Tech. The rest of the schedule, they're off this week, and then Wake Forest and Syracuse. So those two teams both have a win over Louisville, and that's it. That's the extent of the ranked resume, and that's going to be the extent of the ranked resume going into the ACC championship game.
Okay, it appears we're at the end of the conference call. We'll wait for Tony to wave to be put back in, but all right, he is waving. We're going to kind of end on this one because I have feelings about this foolishness, and then we'll drop the question so we can see Tony's pretty face. Atlanta writers, since none of the teams in the top 6 are from the group of SEC teams that won 4 of the last 5 national titles, when you do the eye test, do you ask yourself who would win head-to-head? No, they don't do hypotheticals, and they don't predict what would happen in the future. I think here's to which the writer asks, well, don't you factor in strength of schedule as to why those teams have more losses? Let me drop that so we can see Tony talk. And yeah, that's fantastic. Whose job should we be calling for? You're muted. I'll unmute you.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Tony, if you had to sum up your answer to that question with a hand gesture, how would you do it?
No, we're not doing that. We'll save it for after the show. No, yeah, that was very like, well, of course you're going to have more losses when you play better teams. And it's like, well, I mean, you've just got a bunch of a mess of teams there, and you want credit for losing. And the committee's like, yeah, not right now. Well, there are still teams that are winning. So we're going to talk about them for a bit.
Yeah, that's I mean, listen, if we want to give teams credit for previous seasons, I'm perfectly fine with Notre Dame being permanently ineligible because they've gone 30 years without winning a major bowl. If we want to do that, that's fine, but we have to do that in multiple directions and not just let's scratch the SEC behind the ears.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to give teams credit for past seasons, then where are you putting Michigan in this one? Like past season, smash season. I mean, this is it's very SEC like to be like, but you've seen all of these teams win national championships over the past 6 years. Why won't you look at Alabama versus Indiana? Why won't you look at Georgia versus Notre Dame? It's like, please look at Georgia versus Notre Dame. Please look at Georgia versus Indiana. And the committee's not ready to do that yet. Maybe go win a game.
Well, and I think there's a real possibility that Alabama goes into Bloomington and beats Indiana. Mm-hmm. That's absolutely a possibility. Right now, Alabama hasn't earned that right. You don't get credit for past seasons. Nick Saban is no longer your coach. You don't get credit for having Nick Saban used to coach your team. So, and I think this would be fascinating to see Ole Miss go into Happy Valley in December, on December 20th or December 21st, especially if that's a night game and it's 30 degrees. How are they going to respond? We've watched Big Ten teams have to play bowl games in the South for as long as they've been playing bowl games. So now we finally get a chance potentially to see. And if the SEC teams go north and absolutely thump the teams up north, that will probably somehow subconsciously factor into decisions next year. But I kind of want to see it. Alabama going to Indiana is a far more interesting game than Indiana going to Alabama.
100%.
Two quick things from me, and then we'll kind of see where things take us. One, how many stories are we going to have to hear about Kalen DeBoer going against the team that he used to be a coach at, even though it was 1 year, 2019 as offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach, and two, Tony blinked twice if that question was asked by Saturday's Down South, because that sounds like something from them.
No. Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
Oh my God. Bring your dumb child to work day?
No. Just and Kirby wouldn't even call him an idiot or stupid, I'm sure. But Jason Manley makes a great point that maybe the Georgia writers should be asking Kirby about his team's off-field discretions and things such as that, rather than worrying about this so early. When I'll be shocked if Georgia has 2 losses and is kept out just because. But
no, if they win out, even if they don't go to the SEC championship game, and I don't know if that's possible. I haven't looked at the SEC standings to figure out if that's possible. But if they win out, guess what? You're one spot out right now. Teams ahead of you are going to lose, and you're not going to have. Right now. It does not look like there are going to be any bid stealers. It looks like this is kind of the worst case scenario for the SEC and the Big Ten right now, and really just the SEC because the Big Ten just has the 4 teams in. So the SEC is going to get 4 teams in. Or if Notre Dame loses, the 5th team in is probably an SEC team. If one of the SEC teams loses, another SEC team is going to replace them. So you're looking at 4 to 5 SEC teams. And if you're not one of the top 4 or 5 SEC teams, sorry, be one, be more than just mid in your conference, and sure you can get in.
Good question from Wingman Ted. If Ohio State beats Oregon, do you think they just swap 1 and 2? Texas at that point would have a win over Texas A&M, assuming, but even Texas A&M right now is what they are
15, and they would also have an SEC championship game win, presumably at that point. So
against what would be then a 3-loss team, and probably by that point. So I think it depends on the win, depends on the loss. Ohio State's getting credit for a 1-point loss on the road. They wouldn't be getting as much credit for a 17-point loss on the road. So they could also factors into how that game goes. Is there anything else that we need to touch on before
we have a boatload of questions, but I think we kind of covered everything. I think we've hit all the major high points. I mean, we're going to have plenty more programming through the course of the week to answer maybe more of your specific football questions. Of course, we love talking about all this, but you know how else you can talk to us about this? By joining BuckeyeHuddle.com. And you can get your first month for $4.99 a month. Don't even worry about that crummy pizza. This is like less than getting crummy breadsticks. I mean, so, you can talk to Tom, Tony, myself about team coverage, Mark about recruiting, our panel of experts. Tom and Ross Fulton have already done some great stuff breaking down Ohio State's most recent game, but join us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. $4.99 for your first month. That gets you through not only the Michigan game, but also potentially the Big Ten championship game and so much more.
And the Indiana game, which is, even though it's a noon kick, it's still pretty big. So before you go, if you want to hit the thumbs up, we would appreciate that. And as Kevin said, go find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. Late night. This will be the last late Tuesday night. Then we go back to the regularly early-ish Tuesday nights for these reveals. So we will see you then. We'll see you every day pretty much now throughout the rest of the year and beyond. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.